Welcome to the Coaching Lab Podcast. If this is your first time to join us, my name is Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching, and it is a pleasure to have you join us today. This episode's a little unique. For the first time in our 350 plus episodes, we decided we're going to break an interview into two pieces. We had such a great conversation with Steve Magness that we felt like there was too much to include in one. And so for the first time ever, we split this into two episodes. If you missed the first part, that's the last episode. This is the kickoff to the second part of that. And it is fascinating, the insights that he shares with us, not only about our own health and wellness, but even more so about performance, whether that performance is personal pursuits, athletic pursuits, or our professional pursuits. You're going to love it. He just does such a good job. He's one of only maybe 4 or 5 people in our history to come back as a guest more than once. If you do have any questions on the coaching front, either about developing your career or building upon your career as a coach, you can always reach out to us, results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or visit the website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And there is a spot if you are looking to get certified. We are taking registrations now for the next cohort. Without further ado, let's jump into the second part of the interview with Steve Magness. You talk about the obviously immense focus and drive that, as we've talked about, it can take over your life when you're a high performer. It almost has to take over your life. And that works well until it doesn't. And then it can result in what you describe as unidimensional identity, which we've been kind of nudging up against. How can those with decades sometimes, and certainly years, of external success shift this approach? But it's gotten me here, Steve. I don't want to change this. I know it's not healthy. I know it's not the best thing for fill in the blank, my relationships, my health, my sleep, etc. But Steve, I'm here because that's who I am. I'm here because those are the habits that I've pursued. I can't change that. What advice do you have for that person to move on?
This is one of the hardest things to do because when it's worked
so well.
It's hard to let go of it.
Yeah.
But the advice I'd give, and I tell this story in the book, but it's one that kind of hit home because I know her personally. It was the marathon great Sarah Hall, because she was a phenom as an athlete. Won the national cross country championships. Was extremely good in college, was very good afterwards on the track. And now I think she's 41 now. She just set the American Masters marathon record, running, I think, like 2:23 or something like that as a 41-year-old woman, which is just mind blowing. But part of her success, and she's had a lot of success, even I would argue even more success in her late 30s, early 40s than she did in her 20s on the world stage. I mean, she was 5th at the World Championships in the marathon a couple of years ago. Is she has taken what made her great, this drive, this work ethic, this love of the sport, but she has taken that and matured with it. And I have some quotes in the book from her, but essentially what happened is she realized that focusing on the outcome and the external and defining herself by the success was stealing away from the enjoyment and her actual performance in the event. And she needed to take a different approach. I loved it when she set the American half marathon record. She and her husband and / coach Ryan, essentially leading up to the race, said, screw it. Don't focus on the time. Stop shooting for the half marathon record. I just want you to get in there, feel like you're flying, and compete with these like other women around you. And she did. And she set the record. And if you watch Sarah run sometimes in the marathon and half marathon, I can't remember if she did it in this race or not, but there's almost always a point where she takes her watch mid-race, takes it off, and flings it into the crowd. And you're just like, what in the world are you doing? But if you talk to her, it's that moment where she realizes I'm looking at my watch. I'm getting too caught up into the time and the splits. I just need to be in the moment and let go and do it. And that's fun to her. So to get back to your question is, I think we get trapped into thinking, this is what got me here. This is the path. This is the success. But to use that word again, sometimes it takes courage to go in another direction, to let go a little bit. And if you're saying, no, I can't do that, what I would say is find ways and paths where you can experiment. You know, the other story I tell in the book, and I'll keep it brief, but that I loved is Tony Hawk, who legendary skateboarder. And he got stuck, even though he was the best in the world. And one of his friends and fellow skateboarders told him, and I love this quote, risk not winning.
Yes, I loved it too. I underlined that one. Risk not winning. Listen to that, folks. Risk not winning.
And that was the breakthrough. Afterwards, he got his legendary 900 trick and broke through again and had more fun doing it. So here's my answer to the people who say, I can't do it no other way. If Tony freaking Hawk can do it another way and let go, the man who is like defined legend, who has multiple video games, like, you know, named after him, like, you can risk not winning too. It's going to be okay.
And I like how you say, try it in something. You don't have to shift your entire approach as the CEO. You don't have to completely change over what you're doing as the football coach or the runner or whatever, to kind of dip your toe into it. So I think you got my notes in advance or something here, buddy. So Sarah's story, I loved it. We had Ryan Hall on the podcast, and it was interesting timing because when we had him on was right about when Sarah was starting to make her breakthrough. He was bulking up and doing his thing. But the quote that I wrote down that might have been one of the ones you had in the back of your mind, I never want to have a goal that's ripping me out of the present and keeping me from loving the people in my life well. Oh my gosh. Sarah, you're a genius.
It's wonderful. I mean, she's smart, she's great. And that like sums it up right there. That's what it's about.
It's what it's about. But it's so hard to do, the letting go piece. And I've been fiddling with this. It's funny you say about the watch. I've run most of my life, and I'm running as well at 58 as I have in probably 15 years. And the only difference is I'm not looking at the watch. I was so like, okay, first mile's got to be 5:42, second mile's got, and it's the whole challenge threat thing. As soon as you get off, your body kicks in the threat mode, and now you're not as effective. Your heart's not pumping as well. Your blood vessels aren't moving that blood through. So it's a self-defeating approach that I used for 30 years. But how do you I've fiddled with some stuff, so I've got some things in my own answer. But how would you help people begin to let go in whatever it is? We've talked about Sarah's approach with running, but in other aspects of life, besides stopping looking at the clock or reducing the emphasis on the outcome, how else might people try to let go, to distinguish between stress or strive and obsess? So you got striving on one side, you got obsessing on the other side. How do you, and I think you bring a very unique approach to this for some other reasons, but how would you help us walk that tightrope?
Yeah. So step one, I would say, is figuring out where you fall on that spectrum between striving and obsession. And the easiest way is to do this, is to take the thing and see how you feel not doing it. So in the watch example, take the watch off. And do you feel some anxiety without it? Do you feel like, I can't do this? I feel naked. I don't have my support. Because that's often how it's reported, right? Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's you're tied to your phone and replying to emails as the CEO, and you know that you're not getting the productive stuff done that maybe you want, or maybe not even the productive, the enjoyable stuff, the stuff that fuels your love for being an entrepreneur or a CEO or what have you. And instead you just find yourself like damage control, replying to email after email after email. So step one is, for a morning, don't reply to the email and see how it makes you feel. And chances are it's going to probably, for that type of person, make you feel miserable. And you're going to have this almost like addictive, like, I got to sign on to my phone and reply to some. If that's the case, you probably know you're trending towards obsession, right? And my answer isn't to say, hey, go cold turkey. Is to look at small ways where you can say, okay, I'm going to let go a little bit and I'm going to feel a touch of that anxiety, but just enough so that I can deal with it. So that email example, you say, okay, I'm not going to go the whole morning, but I'm going to set the precedent, or maybe you send out an email to the company and say, hey, I'm blocking off from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. to do some deep work, so I won't be able to reply to your emails. And you set that standard. And you might still feel that I need to check, I need to reply, the company's going to melt down. But it's a manageable enough amount of time where you say, okay, I'll be okay. I can make it an hour and a half or 2 hours or what have you. And eventually you convince your brain that like the world isn't going to end, that it's going to be okay. You can do the same thing when we look at, when you're defining yourself by outcomes or you're overly obsessed with outcomes, like just go the other way a little bit, right? Have some process orientation. Say, hey, I know I want to check how many books I've sold this week or this day or what have you. But instead, I'm going to say, hey, I'm not going to check that. I'm going to come back for today or this week or whatever defined period and execute the 5 process steps that I've said really matter are why I'm trying to get this book out there. Whatever it is, we can take bite-sized chunks of taking a little bit of that edge off of the obsession to move us back towards, I'm striving. I still care about the outcome, but it's not taking over, and to use, Sarah's quote, stealing that piece from you.
Well, and you used the word breakthrough earlier. If we constantly are saying, well, I'm here in my life, I'm in this role, position, situation that I think is good because I've done it this way. Okay, I can buy that, but you can't have a breakthrough if you continue to do it the same way. And so what you're talking about is opening the door to potential breakthrough. Maybe it doesn't work, but it's an easy way to say, okay, Brad, you've been using this watch. You've been dialing every split, every whatever for 30 years. You're not going to get any better. You're getting older, buddy. But if you did this dramatic shift, it could create a breakthrough. And the CEO could create a new idea because they're not, she's not returning emails every 5 seconds. And so I'm almost hearing, yes, it can have this impact to bring the joy back, but I'm also hearing you say, and it might be your window to a breakthrough.
I'll use the running example. I use way too many of them, but here's the deal. Let's say for whatever reason, Brad, you're running the 10K race and you're just feeling good, yeah, and everything's clicking. But then you get to mile 1 and you look down at your watch and you're like, oh no, yep, I'm 10 seconds too fast.
Yep.
And what happens is sometimes you go, I better ease off because I'm faster than I thought I was, and this isn't me pacing. But what happens is for that day is when everything clicked. And if you didn't look down, you would have sustained that because for whatever reason, fitness, right day, right temperature, right race, you would have been fine. You will never find that out if you look down and you let the watch or the external mechanism dictate that. And I think it's the same when we look at things outside of sport as well, is we intentionally constrain ourselves by looking at some of these external measures that we've used for a long time, or these external processes that we've used for a long time. And we say, hey, this is a little outside of these bounds. I need to reel it back in. We've just limited ourselves. And it comes back to that idea we talked about earlier. And I said, hey, we got to explore a little bit. We got to have more down the rabbit hole days. We got to be able to try some things. Because if you don't, like, you're done for. And I'll use the example in my own writing career. Do Hard Things did really well. I guarantee you my publisher would have loved if I would have wrote Do Hard Things 2. And just said, hey, we're going to give you a little bit more of the same thing, different, maybe make it rhyme, but same ideas. This is why you see so many sequels in movies, right? Everything is like, sequel. Why? Because it's going to do pretty well if you've got that built-in audience. But me, as a creative, as a writer, as someone who doesn't just write books to, hey, I need to make this money and sell as many copies as possible. But my goal and my job, coming back to my values, is to write books to explore ideas that I think will help people, partly because the journey I'm going on to help me as well. Right. I'm not the guy. I don't need to write Do Hard Things 2 because I wrote Do Hard Things 1.
Do more hard things.
Yeah, there you go. But I need to write this book because that's part of it. If it sells as well, great. If it doesn't, it's okay, because that's not the reason I wrote it. And I think that we need to be able to free ourselves to explore in that way. And we can more so when we break away from saying, hey, the only thing that matters is the sales number or the end result or the outcome metrics that come at us. When we only focus on that stuff, we're just going to be like Hollywood and go sequel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it might be successful, but as individuals, it's not going to be nourishing because we're creatives, we're explorers, and we need to kind of fulfill that need.
Well, and it may guarantee good, but it eliminates the opportunity for great.
Bingo.
We'll pull Jim Collins in for a second. Your mention of that reminds me of Alex Hutchinson's story of his 1500 where they messed up the timing. I don't know if you remember that story, but he finally had a breakthrough because the guy was giving him the wrong splits. And so he was running blindly, or he thought so. And then he has this PR that he'd been working on for 3 years or something. It's awesome. I want to come back to a phrase. We're going to pull into your previous book because this phrase pissed me off when I read it from you, and it's changed my life. And it was lower the bar, raise the floor. That ties in a little bit to what we're talking about here. And when I read it, I was mad at you. I'm like, Steve, no, we can't have people lower the bar. People are settling anyway. They're just going with the status quo. You can't have them lower the bar. And then I read it 17 more times and was like, I see now what you mean. Talk us through this, because folks, this is powerful, and we can use it in running, but we can use it in life. And man, you nailed it with this. Again, you made me mad, but good job.
I appreciate it. No, I made myself mad during it because I'm like you. I'm like, oh, we need high standards and blah, blah, blah. Everyone settles. I get that. But I think what it does is it gives us permission to keep going and trying and exploring what we're capable of. And lowering the bar, raise the floor means this, is that, again, the running example is, what do we focus on? Our PR, our best performance ever. How do we get it, get that little tiny fraction of a second more? Well, those performances are very rare, especially as
that's why they're called a personal record, folks.
Right. Yeah. They come, maybe when we just start, they come frequently, but after we get going, they're less frequent. Yeah. So if we just focus on that, what it does is it sets us up for this feast or famine. And instead, what happens is if we raise that floor, which could in running terms mean hey, what's your best average?
Yeah. What are your last 5? What are your last 3?
Yeah. What can you show up on that 5K race, no matter what, and be like, I'm going to give this even on a bad day. I'm capable of this. Yep. And what I found is that simple reframe, A, makes us more consistently good. And then B, I think it sets us up for when those days come where everything clicks, where we have a higher floor to jump off of, right? And we can take advantage of those great days. And I think that applies to everything else. And I would apply it to my writing, right? If I sat down and I said, hey, Steve, every day I need to write the best, 10 paragraphs that I can, I would probably walk away. Because as anyone who, as you know, right, as anyone who knows who has written things, sometimes what happens is you sit down and you're like, oh gosh, I don't know how to get this going. But what happens is if you can raise that floor and say, hey, every day I'm going to sit down and give you some paragraphs and they're going to be pretty good and I'm going to make them better. And if I can make that average better, then over time I'm going to look back and be like, hey, that was a pretty good chapter. Right? I can refine it a bit, but that was pretty dang good. Yeah. And that's generally how most of my books go, is I go through the cycle of I'm not shooting for perfection. I'm shooting for pretty dang good. I'm going to raise that floor as much as I can. And then I look back. Inevitably I hit a point where I'm like, this must be garbage. And then I look back and I'm like, dang, who wrote this? This is pretty good. And it comes from stacking those pretty good days instead of the feast or famine, like great day. And then, I can't write a sentence.
It puts you in the arena.
Bingo.
It gives you the opportunity to have the great days. Because like you said, you can't control every little thing about how you slept, what you ate, there's so many variables that, yes, we've researched a lot of them, but there's still a lot unknown out there. And when those big days come, whether it's cognitively or physically or relationally, whatever it is, you've put yourself in that arena. Oh man, that was awesome. Let's talk about, you talk about this quote, what we give attention to gains in value. We know that having a clear aim elevates our outcomes. When we know what we're shooting for, elevates our outcomes. But you also noted, and I thought this was fascinating, that there's potential downsides. You mentioned excessive focus for teenagers on mental health issues and the over-identification that you have with your own diagnosis. Walk us through that a little bit and how that focused aim, sure, it's good, and it has some downsides.
Yeah. So here's how I like to explain this is your brain is predictive, and what you pay attention to is the signal to your brain that this is valuable.
Yes.
Right. And the simplest example is this. We've all done this. The thing that we've convinced our brain is most valuable is often our phones. So if I have my phone on my desk, and there's research on this, even if that phone is off, yeah, I will be less creative and productive because part of my brain is saying, oh, there's that, rectangular thing that is valuable. So I got to check it. It's why we feel phantom vibration sometimes. It's like, oh, was that a ding or a beep or a buzz? Yep. And you look and nothing happened because your brain is saying, this is valuable. I'm going to pay attention to it. The same thing happens to the rest of our life, right? And the research on labels is fascinating in the sense that, like, if we start telling ourselves that and paying attention to, for example, our mental health diagnosis, and saying, for me, it was like once I found out, hey, this crazy voice in my head is obsessive compulsive disorder. At first, it's like relieving. And then you start assigning or excess important to it because you have this label, right? And what happens is everything I did or could do, I could excuse away as saying, oh, that's just my OCD. This is my OCD. Mm. And what happened is that got in the way of growth because, like, yes, it's OCD, but like anything, there is therapy and training to help you, navigate or deal with some of those, voices or consequences or feelings or sensations. But if you just attach to the label, you get to excuse that growth away because it's like, this is it. And I think what happens is we do these in do that in other aspects of life where we narrow so far on whatever it is we're giving attention to that we stop seeing the periphery. You can see this again, coming back to the idea of letting go. You can see this in highly determined people who are striving for success. The outcome becomes so focused that instead of maybe initially it was a motivator, now it becomes the roadblock, right? It's the Alex Hutchinson story you told there. 3 years, he couldn't break that PR until he had this weird sensation where it's like he got the wrong feedback. Part of the reason we get stuck is because that PR gets cemented in our brain where it's like, this is important. This is what I'm trying to do. And that cementation shifts it from a motivator to a constrainer so that every time we're running, our brain's thinking, are we on pace to run our PR? Is it possible? And once it seems like it might not be, or might just the slightest hint of it going in the wrong direction, our brain hits the eject button because it says, oh, we're not going to hit the valuable thing, like check out. So I think the lesson to me here is, again, be very intentional on what you're telling your brain to value.
That leads us into the social identity complexity, which you mentioned in passing, but I think folks might be surprised to hear is a thing these days. Distinguishing what we do from who we are. Oh, I mean, there's so many examples. Our incredible daughter was a gymnast for years, and she'll tell you today, and she's 28 now, she'll tell you today she wishes she would have stopped a year earlier because her world expanded. Like, she discovered all these amazing things. She stopped as I think a sophomore in high school. But she couldn't, because she literally, and I feel horrible about this as her dad, thought at the time, who am I if I'm not a gymnast? Because I'm there every day. I go to school. I go to gymnastics. I will admit I've felt that way sometimes with triathlon pursuits and that kind of thing, or as an entrepreneur. How do you separate those? And I like this phrase you use, the separating verb from noun. I think that's something people can really latch onto and remember. So verb, I cook, versus noun, I am a cook. I think, frankly, there's value in going both directions, like making that shift to I am a runner from I run makes it much more likely you're going to run, or I eat healthy versus I ate healthy today, or I'm a healthy eater, I guess would be a better example, is very different. It can help you grab onto valuable steps, but the negative side has some issues. Can you talk us through the negative side of this and how we can kind of nudge that door to the side a little bit?
Yeah, you're spot on. And this is why I love these conversations with you, because everything has nuance, right? The thing that makes us great is the thing that gets in the way.
Yes.
Right? It's transitioning from I like to run to I am a runner. Yeah. Undoubtedly, for me and probably for you, like made us train more, be motivated, and perform better. Yeah. Right?
Totally.
But at the same time, once it becomes that noun, it can be the thing that gets in the way.
Yes.
You start seeing your world as I am a runner, I'm self-defined, and we go on that roller coaster where it's like a bad run. Is it now just I had a bad run, or I failed at running or racing? It is I am a failure, right? Because there's that intertwinement. Right. So I think the answer to you is all of this stuff is really complex, and we need to first be aware of the complexity and nuance of it so that we can make sure that we're using that I am, that noun, productively instead of destructively. And it comes back to seeing those situations where it's okay to identify things. And I'll use this phrase again. It's okay to love something, but you have to be careful of being married to it. Yeah. And that's what it comes down to me. It sounds like your daughter, similar to me in my running career, there were periods where I was married to it. Yeah. And when you're married to it, what happens? It's hard to step away, obviously.
Right.
And this is why you see in the athletic literature, there's this concept that psychologists call athletes die twice, right?
Yes.
Once, like everybody else.
That. Yep.
Yeah. But once at the end of the career, because you finish your career and you're just like, who in the hell am I?
Yep.
Without the thing. And it sends people literally on an identity crisis. So the answer here is, I think, is if you notice yourself going down that role or that path, is to think of, okay, how do I give value and increase the attention and value to the other aspects of myself? So you think of, again, the hobbies, the interests, the roles that you play in your life and say, okay, I'm not just a runner. That's really important. I'm not just a gymnast. I'm not just a writer, but I also have these other things. And what I would challenge people to do, and the exercise I found really helpful for people, is don't just do this individually. Pick, 2 or 3 friends or family members and have them say, hey, what are my roles or my social identities in life? What do you think? And chances are they're going to give you feedback where you're like, holy crap, you're right. This is a big aspect of my life, right? I didn't even think about this. Again, think of it with my idea or what you pointed out earlier. Even I struggle with seeing whistleblowing as like this big aspect when I have all this other stuff over here. Outside perspective can often remind you of like, hey, this isn't the whole world. Zoom out, figure out things to, branch you out. And the other aspect I'd say is, again, if we can do activities or put ourselves in places where we can have our perspective change, that often allows us to, again, see the bigger picture and see the complexity. This is why, there's some wonderful research that shows even things as simple as experiencing awe, right? Seeing wonder in nature, going on long hikes, all of those things shift our perspective away from just kind of like a me focused where we just see us and, being the gymnast or runner or writer. And it allows us to zoom out and say, okay, the world is bigger. I am bigger. I don't have to be this narrow person. It's going to be okay.
So let's go back to the phases of life. A lot of my writing is about that second half of life and helping folks figure that whole process out. And that's what I hear from my readers constantly is like, I want to figure this next phase out, but I've been this employee, I've been this CEO, I've been this business owner, I've been this whatever for 40 X years. And I don't even know where to start. So your awe piece, I think I think you mentioned in your book, even a kind of a 3-day reset where you're out in nature. I think that's a wonderful first step or early step. Other things that folks that are in the late 50s, early 60s, approaching 70, who are feeling that way, any specifics for that group? Or maybe they're not specifics. Maybe they apply to anybody.
Yeah, two things that I think are really important here is there's a whole bunch of psychology research that shows the process of sense making, meaning understanding how you're telling your story to yourself. Is often what happens is it's almost like we have a narrator and the story gets written for us. And we just assume like, oh, I'm Steve and I did this for this many years and this is who I am and this is who I am. If we take time and be intentional, we get to rewrite that story. So this is where journaling, this is where I think part of the 3-day, hike comes into play is it forces you to kind of be alone with your thoughts and figure things out. But you can do this intentionally. Again, journaling, going on walks and thinking about, how do I make sense of this? How do I take this thing that has been part of my life or this thing that has happened to me and integrate it into the rest of, the story? I get to choose to a degree how to write that. So expressive writing is really important. And then the other part of it that I think is really fascinating that helpful on this is actually stealing stuff from the relationship research. So research shows us that when we're dating someone, one of the best things we can do, or two of the best things we can do are this, is first is what they call self-disclosure, which means that you start telling someone else like things that, are important and maybe even intimate, or maybe things you don't tell others. And what happens is that signals like, I trust you. And if they reciprocate, then you build that trust bond and you start to understand yourself better because you have that, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to disclose something important about myself. And that helps you figure out not only the other person, but it helps you figure out yourself. And the other part of the dating literature that is really interesting is that when we do interesting or novel or challenging things on dates with our partner or significant other, it creates what researchers call self-expansion. Meaning, simply, we learn about the other person, but we also learn about ourselves. This is why, going and doing some complex puzzle or solving something with a partner, or going on, again, out in nature in a hike, or even doing something together, some sort of, athletic challenge or intellectual challenge. Like all of those things tend to lead to happier, healthier, relationships and long-term dating because they cause this self-expansion where we learn and grow versus if we do something passive. Now, I'm not saying never do something passive. Sometimes you got to chill, and that's helpful too. But we also need these things that like push us outside of our boundaries a little bit. So if you're a 50 or 60-year-old person thinking, okay, what do I do? I've been this person for all my life. Like, think of how can I expand myself? Maybe that is with your partner. Maybe it's saying, you know what, we're going to take up this cooking class together, or we're going to learn how to, or even I'm going to learn crafting. My dad took up stained glass and flying in his retirement age, 60s to 70s. And at first I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like, this is because he was an orthodontist, this is like way out of it, but he loved it. And it kind of helped him shift towards retirement because he had these other things to kind of explore himself in different avenues. And I think, again, it's not saying let go of who you are. Take those experiences with you. Take that wisdom with you. But make sure you're having things in your life that expand your sense of self so that you can kind of navigate it.
All right, I'm watching the clock, and there's so much I want to cover. Let's try to get two more in here. The concept of joy. I've lived in the world of health and wellness forever, and I think that's the missing piece. And you talk about this with performance as well. But from my perspective, folks are looking for motivation. I need motivation to eat better. I need motivation to work out. I need motivation to blah, blah, blah. No, you don't. If we can discover the joy and either see that the joy is already in that activity or find one. Exercise is a great example. I hate exercising, but I got to do it. Dude, there's 1,000 different options. Go do something else until you find something that brings you joy, or bring joy into it. Maybe music helps with that. Listening to a podcast, whatever. So it's finding, realizing, or bringing the joy is what I always encourage folks to do. Where do you see this piece of joy playing a role, either in performance or in optimal living, or however you want to take this? Because you talk a lot about it, and I loved that.
I think what it is it's the fuel that gets forgotten.
Yes, it's exactly.
Because we think motivation and drive and I got to do this. But, for so many exercisers, people who want to take up exercise, they come to me and they say, I hate running, or I hate doing this.
That's fine.
And I'm like, that's all right. Like, we'll try something else. Or sometimes I say, what do you like doing? And they'll be like, oh, I love getting coffee with my friends. I'm like, great. I got a new plan for you. Yep. You go invite those friends and bring the coffee with you to the park and you're just going to go walk and talk with your coffee. And they're just, what? And what that is this avenue in towards exercise where you're taking that joy with you. And pretty soon what happens is maybe that walk becomes like a walk jog with your friends or a bike ride or whatever have you. And you're bringing something that you enjoy with it. And I think that is the key. And that's also the key with performance. So in my own life, when I look at my athletic career, the times I perform
He's a
best,
401 miler, by the way, folks, just to contextualize things.
But the times I performed best, when I ran that 401 mile, I was training really hard, but man, was I having a lot of fun because I was doing it with my teammates and best friends, and we were exploring our limits. The times when I wasn't performing well, and even I was as dedicated, I forgot the joy. I thought the key was, I got to be super serious and eat perfect and train perfect and do all this stuff. And no, I can't go out and have some fun afterwards because I'm the serious person. My performance got worse because it was no longer fun. And I think that is the mistake we make in the performance world. We say, it's got to be, I got to be obsessed, be all in, hyper focused. That's not fun. No. If you take the fun out of it, eventually it's going to catch up.
Folks, you got to remember that. Please. You kind of related to that. Tom Tellis, you talked about a quote that he shared with you years ago about effort, I think was the word. I don't have it written down here, but it seems like the word was effort. And he was telling you, effort doesn't mean forcing it. It doesn't mean digging in. It doesn't mean gritting your teeth. It means trusting your body to do what it was trained to do. That seems to apply to not just athletics, but everything. Can you kind of walk us through that concept?
Yeah. I mean, put simply, we often think that effort is loud.
Yeah.
When it's really just soft. And we know this in the athletic realm. If I asked you, Brad, to run a couple seconds faster for your mile pace, you wouldn't say, okay, I gotta tense up and grit my teeth and push. You'd say, okay, maybe I move my arms a little bit faster or take a little longer stride. It's not a big change. And all of a sudden your performance has improved because you're running a little bit faster. Right. And I think that applies to everything else in life. Is too often we think, I've got to grit. I got to make it or force it to happen. And when we get in that mindset, we try and force it. We tighten up, we tense up, we put too much pressure on ourselves, and we end up losing the performance instead of kind of just letting it occur. And I think more of it is, again, to use the athletic phrase, we got to trust our training. And if we trust our training and we've done the work, then the race is, it might be hard, but it's kind of a celebration of the work we've put in. And the same is true for writing. The same is true for giving a speech. The same is true for doing some big project, is that once we get to that point, it should be some sort of, it can be hard, but it's some sort of celebration of what of the work we've done to get us to that point.
Love that. Steve, really appreciate the time. What's next for Steve Magness? This book comes out. You're going to be spending a lot of time getting the news out, et cetera, answering questions, doing interviews. But what's next? You've got a new baby. You just turned 40. You always talk about you've got your next book started before your first book comes out. So what's going on in Steve's life? Where are you headed here over the next year or so?
I'm just trying to survive right now. No, I've got some projects I'm working on. I'm in the research phase. So that fun phase where I'm just going down rabbit holes, collecting information. I think I've got an idea for another book, but I got to mess around and kind of play with it to see if it'll stick. And that's the phase in my work life. And then my home life is great. I've got wife, kids, and I'm just enjoying that process. And then athletically, all I'm trying to do is push my toddler around in a stroller and get her some fun and adventure as we crank through some intervals every once in a while. We get that wind in her face, and she loves it. So that's been it's been a lot of fun going on runs with her.
He's the annoying guy that passes you in the 10K, pushing the stroller, everyone. So, Steve, great work. Keep it up. We'll look forward to book number 6, and I'll have it on my stack. So thanks for the time. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Brad.
So good. I first discovered Steve back in 2014. I picked up his original book, and I couldn't set it down. And then he just kept getting better. I've got all 5 of his books sitting here right next to me here as I'm recording this. And he's a great follow on X if you're on there as well. Thank you for tuning in to the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. And thanks for sharing it. Again, we don't do any advertising, so any growth is a credit to you, and we appreciate it very much. As always, feel free to reach out to us with any questions about your current or future coaching career. Results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or you can tap into additional health, wellness, and performance resources on the website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And now, it's time to be a catalyst. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching. I will speak with you soon on another episode of the Coaching Lab podcast, or maybe over the YouTube coaching channel.